The flour on her hands looked like ash in the late afternoon light. And when Lucas Whitmore first saw her standing at that wooden table with tears streaming down her face, he thought maybe grief had taken on the shape of something beautiful. He had ridden into Gila Bend, Arizona, with nothing but dust in his lungs and exhaustion in his bones, looking for work at the Turner Ranch, but the foreman had sent him into town with a message for the undertaker. Now here he stood in the doorway of the small adobe kitchen behind the general store, watching a woman who looked barely old enough to be out of girlhood punching dough, with the kind of fury that came from holding too much pain inside. She did not notice him at first. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, strands sticking to her damp cheeks as she worked the pale mass of dough with methodical violence. The kitchen smelled of yeast and death, that strange combination of life rising and life ended, and Lucas found himself frozen there, his message for the undertaker suddenly seeming insignificant compared to whatever sorrow filled this small space. "The undertaker is next door," she said without looking up, her voice hoarse. "If you are here about a body—" "I am," Lucas said, removing his hat, "but I can wait." "Everyone waits," she replied, and there was something bitter in her tone. "Death makes us all wait. He should have left. Should have walked the 20 feet to the undertaker's office and delivered his message about the cowhand who had been kicked by a horse out at the Turner place." But something about the set of her shoulders, the way her hands trembled even as they worked, kept him rooted to that threshold. "How many loaves?" he asked. She looked up then, and he saw that her eyes were the color of honey shot through with grief. "What? How many loaves do you need for the funeral?" 12, she said. "Mrs. Henderson fed half the town in her lifetime. The least I can do is make sure there is bread at her wake." Lucas stepped into the kitchen, setting his hat on a chair. He rolled up his sleeves, moved to the basin to wash his hands. The woman watched him with surprise and suspicion warring on her face. "What are you doing?" "Helping you knead the dough," he said simply. 12 loaves is too much for one person, and grief makes everything heavier." She opened her mouth as if to protest, then closed it again. Something in her seemed to crack just a little, and she nodded once before turning back to her work. Lucas took his place on the opposite side of the table, pulled a portion of the risen dough toward him, and began to work it with steady, practiced movements. They worked in silence. The only sounds were their breathing, the soft thump of dough against wood, and the distant sounds of Gila Bend settling into evening. Lucas had learned to bake from his mother back in Texas, before fever had taken her when he was 15. He knew the rhythm of kneading, the way you had to push and fold, until the dough became smooth and elastic under your palms. He knew, too, that sometimes silence was the only appropriate response to grief. The woman across from him worked with less technique but more emotion, and he found himself adjusting his pace to match hers. When she faltered, her movements slowing as fresh tears fell, he simply kept working, his steady rhythm a kind of anchor. When her hands stilled completely and she pressed her palms flat against the table, head bowed, he stopped too and waited. "She was like a grandmother to me," the woman finally whispered. "My own family is back in Missouri. Mrs. Henderson was the first person who was kind to me when I came here 3 years ago." "I am sorry for your loss," Lucas said, and meant it. She lifted her head, studying him with those honey-colored eyes. "Why are you helping me? You do not even know me." "Maybe that is exactly why," he said. "Sometimes strangers can carry our grief better than friends. We have no expectations to manage." Something shifted in her expression, a softening around the edges. "I am Marianne Reeves, Lucas Whitmore. I am working out at the Turner Ranch. You are new to Gila Bend, arrived this morning." "And you already found your way to a funeral," she said with the ghost of a smile. "Welcome to town, Mr. Whitmore. They returned to kneading, but the silence felt different now, less heavy with unspoken things. As the light outside dimmed to purple and gold, Marianne lit the lamps and they continued working, shaping the dough into loaves, setting them in pans to rise again before baking. Lucas fed wood into the massive oven that dominated one wall of the kitchen while Marianne covered the loaves with clean cloths. "The funeral is tomorrow," she said as they waited for the oven to heat properly. "Mrs. Henderson was 83. She died in her sleep, which is a blessing, I suppose. But it does not make her absence any easier." "Death never does," Lucas agreed. He leaned against the counter, watching as Marianne wiped down the table with efficient movements. "How did you end up in Gila Bend?" "I came to teach at the school," she said. "The town needed a school teacher, and I needed to get away from Missouri. My father wanted me to marry a man 3 times my age who already had buried 2 wives. I chose to come west instead. That took courage." "That took desperation," she corrected, but there was a spark of pride in her voice. "But I do not regret it. This place is harsh, but it is honest. And the people here, like Mrs. Henderson, they have good hearts." The oven reached temperature, and they began sliding the loaves inside, working together with the ease of people who had been doing this for years rather than hours. Lucas found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him. The way she moved with quiet grace despite her grief, the faint scent of rosewater that clung to her hair beneath the smell of bread and smoke. When the last loaf was in the oven, Marianne sank into a chair, exhaustion written across her face. Lucas poured water from a pitcher into 2 tin cups and handed her one. She accepted it with a grateful nod. "Thank you," she said softly. "I do not know what I would have done without your help, Mr. Whitmore, Lucas," he said. "And you would have managed. You strike me as the kind of woman who always manages. Is that a compliment or an observation?" "Both." She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. Lucas felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that was both uncomfortable and thrilling. He had not come to Gila Bend looking for anything but work and a place to rest his head. He certainly had not come looking for a woman with honey-colored eyes who baked bread for funerals and fought her grief with flour-covered fists. They sat together while the bread baked, and Marianne told him about Mrs. Henderson, about the way the old woman had welcomed her with apple pie and practical advice, about how she had helped Marianne navigate the challenges of teaching in a frontier town where half the children spoke Spanish and the other half spoke a rough English that bore little resemblance to her Missouri accent. Lucas listened, adding comments when appropriate, but mostly just letting her talk, understanding that she needed to speak her grief aloud to make it real. "She taught me to make this bread," Marianne said, gesturing toward the oven. "Her own mother's recipe from back east. She said bread was the foundation of civilization, that as long as people could break bread together, there was hope for humanity." "She sounds like she was wise." "She was," Marianne's voice caught. "And now she is gone, and I am here making her bread for her own funeral, and it feels impossible that the world just keeps turning as if nothing has changed." Lucas reached across the small space between their chairs and took her hand. It was a bold gesture, perhaps too bold for 2 people who had just met, but it felt necessary. Her fingers were cold despite the heat from the oven, and they curled around his with a grip that spoke of desperation and need. "The world has changed," he said quietly. "It is smaller and sadder without her in it. But she taught you to make bread, and you are making it now, and that means part of her continues. That is not nothing, Marianne." She looked at him with eyes swimming in fresh tears, but she did not pull her hand away. "How did you become so wise, Lucas Whitmore?" "I am not wise. I have just lost enough people to know that grief is heavy, and sometimes we need help carrying it." They sat like that, hands joined, until the smell of baking bread grew so strong it was almost overwhelming. Marianne pulled away then, wiping her eyes, and they worked together to remove the golden loaves from the oven. Each one was perfect, crusty on the outside and soft within, and Marianne made a small sound of relief as she set the last one on the cooling rack. "She would have been proud," Lucas said, and Marianne nodded, fresh tears tracking down her cheeks. It was full dark when Lucas finally delivered his message to the undertaker, a solemn man named Mr. Carlyle who thanked him curtly and promised to ride out to the Turner Ranch at first light. Lucas walked back through the quiet streets of Gila Bend, his thoughts full of Marianne Reeves and the way sorrow had made her seem both fragile and unbreakable at the same time. He found lodging at the boarding house run by a Mexican woman named Senora Ortiz, who fed him beef and beans and asked no questions about why he had arrived so late. That night, lying on a narrow bed in a room that smelled of dust and creosote, Lucas found himself unable to sleep. His mind kept returning to that kitchen, to the feel of dough under his hands and the sound of Marianne's quiet breathing beside him. The funeral took place the next afternoon at the small church on the edge of town. Lucas had not planned to attend, feeling like an intruder at the grief of strangers, but when the time came, he found himself walking toward the church anyway, drawn by something he could not name. The building was packed with people, testament to the life Mrs. Henderson had lived. Lucas stood at the back, hat in hand, and watched as Marianne sat in the front row, her spine straight despite the weight of her sorrow. The service was simple and heartfelt, filled with hymns and prayers and stories about a woman who had spent her life in service to others. Afterward, at the wake held in the church hall, Lucas saw the 12 loaves of bread displayed on a long table alongside other dishes brought by mourners. People tore pieces from the loaves, sharing them with neighbors and friends, and Lucas felt a fierce pride on Marianne's behalf. She had done this thing, had honored her friend in the most fundamental way possible, by feeding those who mourned. Marianne found him standing near the door, and her face brightened despite her grief. "You came. I wanted to pay my respects. That is kind of you." She looked tired, worn down by emotion and the social demands of death. "I wanted to thank you again for last night. I could not have managed without you." "You are stronger than you think," Lucas said, and then, before he could second-guess himself, added, "Would you let me call on you, Marianne?" "Properly, I mean." She blinked in surprise, color rising in her cheeks. "We only just met." "I know, but I would like to know you better if you would allow it." She studied him for a long moment, and Lucas felt as if she were looking straight through to his bones, weighing and measuring him against some internal standard. Finally, she nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I would like that, Lucas Whitmore. But I should warn you, I am not easy. I am stubborn and opinionated, and I have very particular ideas about how the world should work. I would expect nothing less from a woman who chose teaching over a safe marriage." Her smile widened. "Then you may call on me, but give me a few days. I need time to mourn properly before I can think about anything else." "Take all the time you need," Lucas said. "I am not going anywhere." The days that followed were some of the longest of Lucas's life. He threw himself into work at the Turner Ranch, mending fences and breaking horses, and doing all the hard physical labor that helped quiet his mind. But every evening, as the sun set over the desert and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, his thoughts turned to Marianne and the way she had looked with flour on her hands and tears on her cheeks. He asked around town about her, trying to be subtle but probably failing. The picture that emerged was of a woman who was respected and admired, if not always understood. She taught with passion and refused to back down when parents questioned her methods. She lived in a small house near the school and kept largely to herself, though she was unfailingly kind to those who needed help. She was, by all accounts, exactly the kind of woman Lucas had always imagined himself falling for, if he had allowed himself to imagine such things. On the fourth day after the funeral, Lucas rode into town in his cleanest shirt, his hair still damp from washing at the pump behind the boarding house. He carried a bouquet of wildflowers he had picked from the desert, their bright colors almost garish against the muted browns and greens of the landscape. He felt ridiculous and nervous and more alive than he had in years. Marianne's house was small but well kept, with a garden in front that showed signs of careful tending despite the harsh climate. He knocked on the door, his heart hammering, and when she opened it, the smile that lit her face made every moment of anxiety worth it. "Lucas," she said warmly. "Come in." The interior of her house was cozy and filled with books, more books than Lucas had seen outside of a library. They lined the walls in makeshift shelves, covered the table, were stacked in careful piles on the floor. Marianne saw him looking and laughed. "My one weakness," she said. "I cannot pass a book without wanting to own it. I think I have spent more money on books than food since I arrived in Gila Bend." "A worthy investment," Lucas said, handing her the flowers. "These are for you." She took them with genuine delight, pressing her face into the blooms. "They are beautiful. Let me put them in water." He watched as she moved around her small kitchen, finding a jar and filling it with water, arranging the flowers with careful attention. The domesticity of the moment struck him, the easy intimacy of being in her space, watching her do these small, ordinary things. "How are you?" he asked when she had set the jar on the table. "Truly." She sighed, sinking into a chair and gesturing for him to do the same. "I am managing. Some days are harder than others. But life continues, and I have my students who need me, and that helps." They talked for hours, the conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. Marianne told him about her childhood in Missouri, about the loneliness of being bookish and strange in a place that valued conformity. Lucas told her about growing up on his family's small ranch in Texas, about losing his mother and then his father in quick succession, about the years he had spent drifting from job to job, never quite finding a place that felt like home. "What made you stop here?" Marianne asked. "In Gila Bend, I mean, it is not exactly the most welcoming place." "I do not know," Lucas admitted. "Exhaustion, maybe, or fate. I saw you in that kitchen and I thought—" He trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence without sounding foolish. "You thought what?" "I thought maybe I had been traveling towards something instead of away from things. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be." Marianne's eyes softened. "That is a beautiful thing to say. It is the truth." She reached across the table and took his hand, her touch warm and certain. "I am glad you stopped here, Lucas Whitmore. I am glad you walked into that kitchen and helped me knead dough in silence. I think maybe I needed you even before I knew you existed." The courtship that followed was unconventional by frontier standards. Marianne had no interest in being courted like a delicate flower, and Lucas had no patience for the rigid social rules that governed such things back east. Instead, they carved out their own path, meeting when they could, talking for hours about everything and nothing, building a foundation of friendship that ran deeper than mere attraction. Lucas took her riding into the desert on his days off, showing her the hidden beauty of the landscape that most people in Gila Bend took for granted. They watched sunsets from rocky outcroppings, packed simple meals that they ate while sitting on sun-warmed stones, talked about their dreams and fears with the kind of honesty that only comes when you know you have found someone who will not judge you for your truths. Marianne introduced him to her students, and Lucas found himself charmed by the motley collection of children who regarded their teacher with a mixture of awe and affection. He helped repair the school's roof when it started leaking, and Marianne rewarded him with lemonade and kisses stolen in the shade behind the building. The town watched their courtship with interest and approval. Lucas Whitmore was a good man, hardworking and honest, and Marianne Reeves deserved happiness after 3 years of lonely devotion to her students. Senora Ortiz took credit for the match, claiming she had known from the moment Lucas walked into her boarding house that he was destined for the school teacher. Mr. Turner, Lucas's boss, gave him a raise and hinted that there might be a foreman position available in the future if he proved himself capable. But it was not all smooth sailing. There were moments of doubt, times when Lucas worried that he was not good enough for a woman as educated and refined as Marianne. There were arguments, too, fierce discussions about everything from politics to religion to the proper way to break a horse. Marianne's temper was as quick as her wit, and Lucas learned to match her passion with patience, to stand firm when necessary but yield when wisdom demanded it. 6 months after they met, on a warm October evening when the desert was painted in shades of gold, Lucas took Marianne back to the outcropping where they had watched their first sunset together. He had been planning this for weeks, saving money from his wages, making arrangements with a jeweler in Tucson who had crafted a simple gold band that he now carried in his pocket like a talisman. "Why are we here?" Marianne asked, though her smile suggested she suspected. Lucas dismounted and helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering on her waist. The sun was just beginning its descent, painting the sky in impossible colors, and in that light, Marianne looked like something from a dream, too beautiful and vital to be real. "I need to ask you something," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "and I wanted to do it here where we first started to know each other." Marianne's eyes widened, filling with tears. "Lucas." He took her hands in his, marveling at how perfectly they fit together, how right it felt to be standing here with her. "I came to Gila Bend with nothing but exhaustion and loss. I was not looking for anything beyond a job and a place to sleep. But then I found you in that kitchen, baking bread for a funeral, and everything changed. You changed me, Marianne. You made me want to be better, to build something lasting, to put down roots instead of always running. I love you. I love your stubbornness and your passion, and the way you care so fiercely about your students. I love the way you see the world with all its potential and beauty, even when it is harsh and unforgiving. I want to spend my life loving you if you will let me. Will you marry me, Marianne Reeves?" She was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face, but she was also smiling, that radiant smile that made his heart ache with joy. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Lucas Whitmore, I will marry you. I love you too, so much that it frightens me sometimes. You are everything I did not know I was looking for." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then they were kissing, clinging to each other as the sun set behind them, and the desert sang its approval in the voice of the evening wind. Lucas felt complete in a way he never had before, as if all the wandering and loss had been leading him to this moment, to this woman, to this place where love could grow even in the hardest soil. They were married 6 weeks later in the same church where Mrs. Henderson's funeral had been held, and Lucas could not help but feel that the old woman would have approved of the symmetry. Marianne wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a bouquet of desert wildflowers that matched the ones Lucas had brought her on their first proper meeting. The church was packed with well-wishers, and the celebration that followed lasted well into the night. Senora Ortiz wept openly, declaring it the most beautiful wedding she had ever seen. Mr. Turner presented them with the deed to a small piece of land on the edge of his property, insisting that Lucas deserved a place to build a home for his new bride. The schoolchildren sang a song they had learned especially for the occasion, and Marianne cried again, overwhelmed by the love and support of the community she had built around herself. That night, in the small room Lucas had been renting at the boarding house, they came together as husband and wife with a tenderness that took Lucas's breath away. Marianne was both shy and bold, nervous and certain, and Lucas found himself falling even more deeply in love with her as they learned each other's bodies and hearts in the intimate darkness. "I never thought I would have this," Marianne whispered afterward, her head resting on his chest. "I thought I had chosen loneliness when I came west, but then you walked into that kitchen and everything changed." "We changed each other," Lucas said, stroking her hair, "and we will keep changing, keep growing together. That is what love is, I think. Not finding someone perfect, but finding someone worth building a life with, worth weathering all the storms alongside. You are a romantic, Lucas Whitmore. Only for you, Marianne Whitmore." She laughed, the sound warm and happy, and Lucas held her close and thought about the future they would build together. The first year of their marriage was filled with hard work and harder lessons. Lucas and Marianne built a house on the land Mr. Turner had given them, working together in the evenings and on weekends to raise walls and lay floors. It was modest, just 3 rooms and a covered porch, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and filled with their love. Marianne continued teaching, though she talked about taking a break when they started a family. Lucas was promoted to foreman at the Turner Ranch, a position that came with more responsibility and better pay. They saved carefully, planning for the future, dreaming about children and expansion and all the possibilities that lay before them. There were challenges, of course. The desert was an unforgiving place, and drought made farming difficult. There were tensions in town, conflicts between the Mexican families who had been there for generations, and the newer Anglo settlers who often viewed them with suspicion. Marianne fought against these prejudices in her classroom, insisting that all children deserved equal education regardless of their background, and Lucas supported her even when it made them unpopular with some of their neighbors. But through it all, they had each other. On the hardest days, when Lucas came home exhausted from the ranch, or Marianne returned from school frustrated by small-minded parents, they found solace in each other's arms. They talked through their problems, supported each other's dreams, and built a partnership that was stronger than any obstacle they faced. 2 years after their wedding, Marianne told Lucas she was pregnant. The news came on a spring morning, delivered with nervous excitement as they sat on their porch watching the sunrise. Lucas felt his heart expand with joy and terror in equal measure, overwhelmed by the enormity of becoming a father. "Are you happy?" Marianne asked, her voice uncertain. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Lucas said, pulling her into his arms. "I am terrified and thrilled and so deeply grateful that I do not have words for it. We are going to have a baby, Marianne, our baby." She laughed, relief evident in her expression. "I was so worried you might not be ready." "I do not know if anyone is ever truly ready," Lucas admitted. "But I know that I want to build a family with you. We will figure it out together, just like we have figured out everything else." The pregnancy was difficult. The desert heat was oppressive, and Marianne struggled with sickness that lasted well into her second trimester. Lucas fretted over her constantly, bringing her water and food, rubbing her swollen feet, reading aloud from her beloved books when she was too tired to do it herself. Mr. Turner gave him time off when needed, understanding that family came first, and the other ranch hands covered for him without complaint. The women of Gila Bend rallied around Marianne, bringing remedies and advice, helping her prepare for the baby's arrival. Senora Ortiz was particularly attentive, treating Marianne like the daughter she had never had, teaching her old remedies and birth practices that had been passed down through generations. Despite her discomfort, Marianne bloomed with happiness, her hand constantly resting on her growing belly, her face glowing with anticipation. Their son was born on a cold December night, arriving early and in a hurry, as if impatient to meet the world. Lucas paced outside while Senora Ortiz and the midwife attended to Marianne, his heart in his throat every time he heard her cry out. When the baby's first wail split the night air, Lucas felt tears stream down his face, overwhelmed with relief and love. Senora Ortiz emerged with a bundle wrapped in blankets, her face wreathed in smiles. "A son, Lucas, a beautiful, healthy son, and Marianne is tired but well." Lucas took the baby with trembling hands, staring down at the tiny red face, the perfect miniature features, the shock of dark hair. "Hello," he whispered. "Hello, little one. I am your father." The baby blinked up at him with unfocused eyes, and Lucas felt his heart crack open with a love so fierce it was almost painful. This was his son, his and Marianne's, a perfect combination of them both and yet entirely his own person. Inside, Marianne lay exhausted but radiant, her hair damp with sweat, her eyes shining with joy. Lucas sat beside her on the bed, carefully placing the baby in her arms, and together they marveled at the miracle they had created. "What should we name him?" Marianne asked softly. They had discussed names for months, unable to agree on anything that felt right. But now, looking at his son's face, Lucas knew with sudden certainty. "James," he said. "James Henderson Whitmore, after your friend who brought us together." Marianne's eyes filled with tears. "Mrs. Henderson would have loved that. James. Yes, it is perfect." Little James Henderson Whitmore was a colicky baby who seemed to have inherited his mother's stubbornness and his father's strong will. The first months were exhausting, filled with sleepless nights and anxious days, but Lucas and Marianne navigated them together, taking turns walking the floor with their fussy son, supporting each other through the fog of new parenthood. Gradually, James settled, becoming a happy, curious baby who seemed fascinated by everything around him. Lucas built a cradle for him, and Marianne sewed tiny clothes, and together they watched their son grow and change with wonder and pride. Marianne took a year off from teaching to care for James, and though she sometimes missed her classroom, she found profound joy in motherhood. Lucas would come home from the ranch to find her reading to their son from her beloved books, or singing Spanish lullabies that Senora Ortiz had taught her, or simply sitting on the porch with James in her arms, watching the desert sunset. "I never knew I could love like this," she told Lucas one evening as they sat together, James sleeping between them. "I thought loving you was the deepest I could feel, but then James came along and I discovered there were new depths I had never imagined." "I know exactly what you mean," Lucas said, touching his son's soft hair with gentle fingers. "It is like my heart keeps expanding to hold all this love, and I wonder how much bigger it can get before it bursts." "It will not burst," Marianne said with a smile. "It will just keep growing." "That is the magic of love, Lucas. There is always room for more." When James was 2 years old, Marianne became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, as if her body knew what to expect. Their daughter was born on a blazing summer day, arriving with none of her brother's drama, sliding into the world with calm efficiency that made even the midwife laugh. They named her Rose Elizabeth, after Lucas's mother and Marianne's grandmother, and she was the opposite of her brother in temperament, a placid baby who slept through the night from the start and seemed content to observe the world with serious dark eyes. With 2 children and a growing household, life became busier but no less joyful. Lucas expanded the house, adding 2 more rooms and a larger kitchen. Marianne returned to teaching part-time, bringing both children with her to the schoolhouse where James played with the other students and Rose napped in a basket in the corner. The years rolled by in a blur of birthdays and holidays, of children's laughter and quiet evenings on the porch. James grew into a serious boy who loved horses and books in equal measure, clearly his parents' son. Rose remained calm and observant, but with a wicked sense of humor that emerged as she learned to talk. Lucas and Marianne watched their children grow with pride and amazement, marveling at the family they had built from nothing but love and determination. Gila Bend grew too, transforming from a rough frontier town into a proper community with schools and churches and businesses. Lucas eventually bought land of his own and started a small horse ranch, building a reputation for breeding quality stock. Marianne became principal of the school, a position that allowed her to implement the progressive educational ideas she had always believed in. They faced setbacks, of course. There were years of drought that tested everyone's endurance, economic panics that threatened their savings, illnesses that sent them to their knees with worry. But through it all, they had each other, the foundation they had built that first night in the kitchen, kneading dough in silence, sharing grief and finding love in the midst of loss. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas took Marianne back to the outcropping where he had proposed. The children were with Senora Ortiz for the evening, and it was just the 2 of them, older and more weathered but no less in love than they had been at the beginning. "You remember the first time I brought you here?" Lucas asked, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the sunset. "Of course I remember," Marianne said, leaning into him. "I remember everything about us. Finding you in that kitchen, the way you helped me without asking questions, the way you looked at me like I was someone worth knowing. You were worth knowing. You are worth everything, Marianne." She turned to face him, her honey-colored eyes still as beautiful as they had been the day they met. "I think about Mrs. Henderson sometimes, about how her death brought us together. I think she would be pleased with how our lives turned out." "I think she would be proud of you," Lucas said. "Of the woman you have become, the family we have built, the impact you have had on this town." "We built it together," Marianne corrected. "Everything we have, everything we are, we did it as partners. That is what I am most proud of, Lucas. Not the house or the children or our success, but the fact that we have remained true partners through all of it." Lucas kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of 10 years of love and commitment. The desert stretched out around them in all its harsh beauty, and he thought about how far they had come from that grief-stricken evening in a kitchen that smelled of death and rising dough. They had built a life together, a family, a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger for it. More years passed. James grew into a tall, serious young man who worked alongside his father on the ranch and read poetry in his spare time. Rose became a teacher like her mother, with the same passion for education and social justice that Marianne had always possessed. Lucas and Marianne became grandparents, marveling at the next generation, at the way their love had rippled out to create new lives and new possibilities. On the 40th anniversary of Mrs. Henderson's death, Marianne baked bread using the old woman's recipe, the same bread she had made with Lucas's help all those years ago. Her hands were older now, marked with age spots and scars from a lifetime of work, but they moved with the same practiced rhythm, kneading the dough with care and love. Lucas joined her in the kitchen, as he always did when she made this particular bread. They worked together in companionable silence, their movements synchronized after decades of partnership, and Lucas thought about how some moments echo through time, how a single act of kindness can reshape the entire trajectory of a life. "What are you thinking about?" Marianne asked, looking up from her work. "How lucky I am," Lucas said simply. "That I walked into a kitchen 40 years ago and found you, that I had the sense to stay and help you knead dough instead of walking away, that we have built this beautiful life together." Marianne's eyes grew misty. "I think about that too, about how many small choices had to align perfectly for us to find each other. If I had not come to Gila Bend, if you had ridden through instead of stopping, if I had not been in that kitchen at that exact moment." "But you were," Lucas interrupted gently. "And I did. And here we are, 40 years later, still making bread together." "Still in love," Marianne added. "Always in love," Lucas confirmed. They finished the bread and baked it, filling their house with the same yeasty, hopeful smell that had filled that long-ago kitchen. Their children and grandchildren came for dinner, and they broke bread together, sharing stories and laughter, building new memories on the foundation of old ones. That night, lying in bed with Marianne tucked against his side, Lucas thought about the journey they had taken together. From strangers meeting in grief to partners building a life, from the uncertainty of new love to the comfortable certainty of decades together, they had weathered every storm and celebrated every joy as a team. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Marianne murmured sleepily. "For saying yes, for building this life with me, for being exactly who you are." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you for seeing me, Lucas, for walking into that kitchen and staying, for loving me through all my sharp edges and impossible demands." "Your sharp edges are my favorite parts," he said, and felt her smile against his shoulder. As they drifted off to sleep, Lucas thought about bread and grief and love, about how the most important moments in life often come disguised as ordinary ones. He thought about a young woman with tears on her face and flour on her hands, about the choice he had made to help a stranger, about the love that had grown from shared silence and honest grief. In the morning, there would be work to do and grandchildren to spoil, and all the ordinary demands of a life well lived. But for now, in the quiet darkness, Lucas held his wife and felt the profound contentment of a man who had found exactly where he belonged. The desert wind whispered around their house, carrying with it the scent of sage and possibility, and Lucas smiled, knowing that their love story, born in a kitchen over funeral bread, would endure long after they were gone, carried forward by the children and grandchildren who bore witness to what two people could build when they chose love over loneliness, partnership over isolation, and hope over despair. The years continued to unfold gently. Lucas and Marianne grew old together with grace, their hair turning silver, their steps slowing, but their love remaining as constant as the desert sun. They sat on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the same sunsets they had watched for decades, finding new beauty in familiar sights. When Lucas was 73, he fell ill with pneumonia. Marianne nursed him with fierce determination, refusing to let death claim him before they had lived every possible moment together. She sat by his bedside, reading aloud from his favorite books, telling him stories about their life together, reminding him of all the reasons he had to fight. And Lucas did fight, drawing strength from her presence, from the memory of a kitchen and bread, and the moment he had chosen to stay instead of walking away. He recovered slowly, and when he was well enough to walk again, Marianne took him outside to sit in the sunshine, and they held hands and were grateful for every additional day they had been given. They lived to see James marry and give them more grandchildren. They lived to see Rose become a school principal, carrying on her mother's legacy. They lived to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by family and friends, by the community they had helped build and shape. On that anniversary, Lucas stood before his family and told the story of how he had met Marianne, about walking into a kitchen and finding a grieving woman making funeral bread, about the choice he had made to stay and help, about the love that had grown from that simple act of kindness. "Life is made up of moments," he said, his voice still strong despite his age. "Most of them seem ordinary when they happen, but some moments, the ones where we choose connection over convenience, where we choose to stay instead of walking away, those moments change everything. I am grateful for every moment I have had with this woman, from that first evening in a kitchen to this celebration today. She is my partner, my love, my best friend, and the greatest gift I have ever received." Marianne stood beside him, tears streaming down her weathered face, and kissed him before their assembled family. "And you are mine," she said. "Always and forever, Lucas Whitmore, you are mine." They lived several more years after that, years filled with the quiet contentment of a life fully lived. They watched the world change around them, saw Gila Bend transform into a modern town with paved roads and electricity. But they remained anchored in each other, their love a constant in a changing world. Lucas passed first, in his sleep on a cool November night, Marianne beside him as she had been for more than 50 years. He went peacefully, his last breath released with a smile on his face, and Marianne held him and wept and thanked God for the gift of their years together. At his funeral, their children and grandchildren gathered, along with what seemed like the entire town of Gila Bend. They shared stories about Lucas's kindness, his strength, his unwavering love for his family. And Marianne, though her heart was shattered with grief, stood tall and spoke about the man who had walked into a kitchen and changed her life forever. "He taught me that love is not about grand gestures," she said, her voice clear despite her tears. "It is about showing up. It is about kneading dough in silence beside someone who is grieving. It is about choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. It is about building a life together, one ordinary moment at a time, until those moments add up to something extraordinary." Lucas gave me 53 years of extraordinary moments, and I will treasure every single one until I join him again. After the funeral, after the guests had left and the house was quiet, Marianne went to her kitchen and began to bake bread. Her hands, now gnarled with arthritis, moved through the familiar motions, kneading dough the way Lucas had taught her all those years ago, the way Mrs. Henderson had taught her before that. She worked in silence, tears falling onto the dough, mixing grief and memory and love into something nourishing and real. When the bread was finished, golden and perfect, she wrapped one loaf carefully and took it to James. "Your father would want you to have this," she said. "It is the same bread I was making the night we met, the same bread that brought us together." James took the loaf with reverent hands, understanding the significance of the gift. "Tell me the story again, Mama, about how you met." And so Marianne told the story once more, about a grief-stricken evening and a stranger who stayed, about flour-covered hands and silent companionship, about how love can grow in the most unexpected places. She told it the way she had told it dozens of times over the years, keeping the memory alive, ensuring that their story would be remembered and treasured by future generations. Marianne lived 3 more years after Lucas passed, long enough to see more great-grandchildren born, long enough to finish writing the history of Gila Bend's school system that she had been working on for years, long enough to know that their legacy was secure. When her time came, she went peacefully, in the same bed where she had slept beside Lucas for half a century. Her children were with her, holding her hands, telling her it was all right to let go, that Lucas was waiting for her. And Marianne smiled, her eyes growing distant, and whispered, "I see him. He is holding flour and he is waiting to help me bake." They buried her beside Lucas, beneath a desert sky that blazed with the colors they had always loved. And on her headstone, beneath her name and dates, their children had inscribed a simple message. She baked bread for a funeral and found a love that lasted forever. Years later, their great-great-granddaughter, a young woman studying history at university, would come across the story of Lucas and Marianne Whitmore. She would read their letters, preserved carefully by family, would study the photographs that showed a handsome couple aging gracefully together, would interview the oldest residents of Gila Bend who still remembered them. And she would write their story down, ensuring that it would not be lost to time, that future generations would know about the cowboy who found a woman baking bread for a funeral, who helped her knead the dough in silence, and who stayed beside her through all the years that followed. She would write about how love can bloom in the most unexpected moments, how kindness can change the trajectory of entire lives, how two people can build something lasting and beautiful from the simplest of beginnings. The story of Lucas and Marianne Whitmore became part of Gila Bend's history, a testament to the power of love and partnership, a reminder that the most important moments in life are often the ones that seem ordinary at the time. Their house still stood, converted into a museum that celebrated the early days of the town, and visitors could see the kitchen where they had first met, could almost smell the bread rising in the old oven. And every year, on the anniversary of their meeting, the schoolchildren of Gila Bend would bake bread using Mrs. Henderson's recipe, the same bread that had brought Lucas and Marianne together all those years ago. They would share it with their families and friends, breaking bread together the way the Whitmores had taught their community to do, carrying forward a legacy of love and connection that would endure for generations to come. In the end, theirs was a love story that transcended time, a story about two people who found each other in the midst of grief and built a life together that was full of joy and purpose and unwavering devotion. It was a story about choosing to stay when leaving would be easier, about building something lasting from ordinary moments, about the extraordinary power of simple kindness. And it all began in a kitchen, with flour-covered hands and silent tears, with a cowboy who chose to help a grieving woman knead dough for a funeral, and with the love that grew from that single moment of compassion into something that would last forever.